We are going to hear from Russ Witte this evening about some possible issues relative to the expansion of wireless transmission of radio frequencies. Russell graduated with an honors in physics from UA and bioengineering several years later, a PhD in bioengineering from ASU. He used electrode arrays to study sensory coding and learning-induced plasticity in the brain. He is a professor of neuroscience, graduate interdisciplinary program, as well as professor of medical imaging, optical sciences, and biomedical engineering. He's got enough interest, I think, to fill 4 lifetimes. He has an experimental ultrasound and neuroimaging laboratory devising hybrid imaging methods that integrate light, ultrasound, and microwaves for advanced imaging. He's very interested in technology and ways that we can learn more, do more, perhaps improve life more with various forms of frequencies. He will share with us some of his concerns about what's being rolled out with 5G, but just to make clear, Sustainable Tucson does not have a position on this topic. We have a great interest. And we love having a forum like this because it's not always easy to get people together and hear an expert in a relaxed and thoughtful environment, and one that's really characterized by civil discourse. We believe in Sustainable Tucson that every person, every family, every group, every community actually holds both the desire and the ability to improve life for future generations. We all share that desire. And so advancing our mission means eliciting actions based on those desires and abilities. We feel that skillful communication is essential to effective teamwork. We see kindness, respect, and clarity as hallmarks of helpful, effective civil conversation. We don't always agree on specific actions or policies, but we do agree to uphold the dignity of each person with whom we work and we communicate. So we invite you all to listen with that kind of fundamental respect and compassion, whether someone's all for 5G or all against 5G or somewhere in between. We're here to listen respectfully, to share respectfully, and I'm really looking forward. Russell's done a lot of research. He's a scientific speaker, and we're so grateful to have you here tonight. I think Russ is going to talk for about 30, 40 minutes or so, and then open up for questions and discussion. Is that right, Russ?
I'm flexible. I've got different topics depending on the interest. So some of it may come up on question and answer. Some of it I'll try to get out there. I do think it's important when we propose potential problems to also talk about solutions. So I want to make sure I get into that a little bit at the end. So yes, I mean, I can improvise as much as one. I can go for about 30 to 45 minutes, but please, anybody can jump in and ask questions at any time. I think that's the best approach.
Super. And then we plan to end pretty crisply at 7:30 p.m. because we've all got full lives and at least the dishes to wash, if not dinner to eat. So Russ, I will just serve as a moderator if needed, as needed. Mostly I'll be taking notes. So we're all yours tonight. Thank you for being here.
All right, great. I appreciate that. And I'll just add maybe to my background that I've worked with pulse microwave radiation for 20 years. So it's not foreign to me. That's one of the reasons that I know so much about this is because I've worked in this area for medical and defense research. And it turns out there just isn't a lot of expertise. Familiar with the literature, and I think that's the most important thing. And that's what I want to convey to you today. I want to give you facts and evidence. You can interpret it the way that you want, but by delivering the information to you, you will no longer ask questions and wonder why, and maybe say things like, well, these things have never really been studied. We don't know what will happen, okay? So we can dismiss those sorts of ideas because there's been nothing actually more studied in terms of environmental factors than the effects of microwave radiation on the body and the planet Earth. And so I will introduce you to some of that literature. And even though we do like to talk about health effects or effects on the environment, I do want to warn you that if you want to solve this problem at the local level or at the state level, you really want to avoid using those terms as being persuasive in making changes to the local ordinance or to the state laws, because of the federal law in 1996 that was passed. They inserted a clause that the local and state communities are not allowed to bring up environmental effects in stopping the proliferation of small cells. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all legitimate legally. Unfortunately, your local elected representatives believe that if you bring that up, they will walk the other way. Okay, so there are actually many other good things you can say where they must respond and address any problems that you may have with 5G technology. And I'll just, for example, if you talk about public safety instead of health effects, your local representative should come running to you to fix the problem, okay? So I'm giving you examples that language is extremely important here as I go into this, but I do know we all want to talk about health. A lot of us are motivated by the potential health impact of these towers, so I want to get into that. But not everybody is. Some people have problems with the privacy aspect of 5G. And especially the state legislatures, by the way, they're more interested about the problems with securing data. Other people have problems with property values, when they find out that their homes just lost 20% of their value because a small cell was installed within a couple 100 feet of their home. And there's plenty of literature that supports that around the country. So there's lots of motivations why we might want to get involved and say, hey, let's hold on here and take a bigger look at what's going on. So now I'm going to jump in. How many people here think that this type of radiation, these types of wireless radiation coming from small cells or the larger towers are completely safe? Is there anybody that believes that?
Let's do thumbs up if you do. That's because some of us have our screens on.
Okay, so I don't think anybody takes that position. How about that it's uncertain, that it just hasn't been studied enough? We need to do more studies to figure that out.
Thumbs up again.
Most people kind of in that.
You got one.
Okay.
Saying uncertain.
Okay, good. So, all right, I'll come back to this in a second. Let me get into my slides a little bit and I'll come back to that. So think about that. So there's really three possibilities when we talk about safety or health. It's either completely safe to everyone all the time and there's no negative impact directly of the radiation. That it's uncertain, there's controversy, we just don't know. We need more studies maybe that will elucidate that. Or three, we have more than enough information to prove in a court of law, for example, that microwave radiation is dangerous and hazardous to life, okay, or some form of life or to particular people. So we got really three options. So let me now go back to sharing my slides here. All right, whoops, wrong one. This over here. Not here. Getting there. Okay, so my real question, we've all heard things like smart cities. I want to know if we're going to have a wise city. We'll get into what a smart city is, but is it going to be a wise city? Okay. So I'm going to start with my take-home messages. If I have time, I'll get into this, but at least you'll have my take-home messages, even if I don't get to all this. I want you to remember some of these things. First is that we have a choice regarding the future of wireless technology in Tucson. Don't let anybody, elected or not, tell you that their hands are tied, nothing I can do, go talk to somebody else. That's simply false, and we can prove that by looking at the existing laws and what the people can actually do. So that's the first thing. Of course, if enough of us believe a certain way, I'm sure that one way or another, we will bring change in the way that we want it. But to be able to do that, we all have to get in the same page in terms of what the problems may be, what's being promised. And when it comes to 5G promises, most of us through the newspaper, through the media, or through industry have heard that 5G promises faster download speeds, perhaps a stronger economy, and a better efficiency. So those are three things that we've heard, whether that's self-driving cars or something else. Now, those are only promises. Those have not been realized anywhere. If you just talk about self-driving cars, there have been a lot of accidents in the few places that have been rolled out. They are not simply plug and play. So this has to be determined. These are just promises. We don't really know. If it's done correctly and wisely, this could be a great benefit. Okay, existing smart cities, they do exist, actually encourage social engineering. We'll get into that. And that gets into the public safety aspect, and not just health, but in terms of behavior engineering. Small cell towers, as I mentioned, reduce property values by 20%. That's pretty easy to remember. Microwaves affect living systems beyond just heating, which is what the FCC will only acknowledge for a long time, even though we have plenty of evidence to the contrary, and we'll go into that. Tucson's current telecom ordinance simply fails to protect life and property. Now, I put that in quotes because that is the stated purpose of the Telecommunications Act. That's why it was created in 1934, to protect life and property, and that is fundamental to the law. Now, those things are also protected by the state and US constitutions. Your elected local representatives took an oath to both of those constitutions when they took office to protect life and property. The telecom ordinance in Tucson endangers public safety, privacy, and property values. Those are all buzzwords. That's why I put them in P, the three Ps. So we want to support the Tucson's wireless telecom facilities ordinance, which was written by informed residents, and I'll give you a link to that below, and all of your elected representatives have received a copy of that. They have not opened that up for discussion or had a meeting to discuss that ordinance, but I will tell you we worked with some of the top people in the country to go through the law and cite things that will dramatically protect people from some of the potential hazards that we may be. And in the end, the take-home message of this is to be informed, spread the word, and then hopefully get your city to discuss the ordinance, which would bring immediate relief to controlling something that we now feel like is kind of out of control. So are small cells popping up in your neighborhood? I'm going to ask this a few questions. Here's 3 small cells right in front of Mansfield Middle School, right there on 6th Street. And Lisa Smith is on here. She's actually gone in and measured exposures in those rooms there where children are taking classes, which is a great resource for Lisa to be able to do that. And you may think you know what a small cell looks like, but do you really know what they look like? They come in a lot of shapes and sizes, and there's also microcells, there's picocells. We're mainly looking at small cells. There's also small cells that go on rooftops. I'll show you an example of that shortly. So we talk about smart city and Internet of Things. These are buzzwords we've heard from industry. Now let's say, what really is 4G and 5G? And even though we like to say 5G, don't ever forget that 4G is included when you say 5G, in the sense that you can't just have 5G without 4G. And when we're adding 5G to Tucson and the exposure levels, we're adding to what's already there. So 4G, and the way that these are all industry defined terms, they're essentially moving targets. Industry will change the definition a little bit here and there to suit what they want to do. But in general, 4G refers to a band of frequencies within the microwave spectrum, typically below 3 gigahertz. And that will cover your cell phone, your laptop, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the 4G towers. And actually, many of the small cell towers in Tucson, they transmit 4G below 3 gigahertz. In fact, most of them are only transmitting right now below 1 gigahertz. Later, they can transmit other frequencies. When we talk about 5G, we're adding more microwave frequencies above 3 gigahertz, up to the limit would be 300 gigahertz. And some companies say that is their upper limit, 300 gigahertz. Most people are talking about maybe up to 70 gigahertz right now, and then they'll add more later. What I want you to remember is this is all pulse modulated microwave radiation. So when we talk about the science, we got to refer to what it is and what it is not, and not simple industry lingo that has no real meaning to say. Okay, so it's pulse modulated microwave radiation. Okay, so why is that important? So you could conceivably put a tower up, and for the next 50 years, you don't know what the pulse sequences would be. There's an infinite number of possibilities. And you can never perfectly say that that cell tower is safe because you don't even know what pulses will be transmitted, and you'd have to do a study retrospective to even find out. So in this situation, the courts, the Supreme Court and on down, for any type of scientific argument, and this was most prevalent in smoking, when this was all brought out in class action lawsuits, the courts made this a little easier for us to figure out how to look at evidence. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. So they refer to something reliable and relevant. Reliable refers to the most weighted, the highest weight evidence in terms of the court, state court, and Supreme Court is peer-reviewed literature, and peer-reviewed literature gives a little more weight if it's more recent. Okay. Expert opinions gives less weight in a courtroom, okay? So it starts with the peer-reviewed literature. That's what we have to start with. The reliable part of it, the relevant part of it is that it has the similar properties of what's going to be transmitted from these towers. That refers us to pulse modulated microwave radiation within those similar frequencies. So if we have literature in science that is comparable to what is going to be used, it becomes directly relevant when we talk about the biological effects of this radiation. Okay, so that brings a little clarity of how we evaluate some of the science as we get into this. Now, we've been promised like a utopian smart city, that kind of like there where everything is all connected and smart and talking to each other. And you know, that certainly would be great if that was realized and that was the main benefit, and it boosted the economy and everything was talking and working properly and everyone contributed and everyone consented to what was going on and agreed and was happy with that. There's a lot of good things in this picture. And that also brings us to the Internet of Things, which says ultimately that everything is connected 24/7. All of these devices, 4G, Bluetooth, your laptop, cell phone, your microwave, and as you will see, as well as the diapers on your baby. Yes, that's part of what's connected on the Internet of Things. But did you know that all of these devices are using this pulse modulated microwave radiation? And then, you know, in a perfect 5G world, all the devices and infrastructure would be monitored 24/7. That's the vision of the future of 5G. That's good for the companies as well, so they know what your behavior habits is. But did you know that this vision for 5G is not new at all? Popular Science, 1947, the microwaves are coming. And they describe a very similar type of vision where everything was connected. The difference was the public did not want this type of technology. This was part of the technocratic movement at the time, technocracy of trying to connect everything to everybody. So there was a public outcry, not just to the concept, but there was an understanding in the public because of radar towers that went up in the early 1930s that immediately saw effects on people, especially military. The military since then has called those effects microwave sickness in general. People would hear clicking sounds near radar towers, again, microwave transmitters. They would get fatigue, migraine headaches, have difficulty sleeping. That was true when the first radar tower went up, I think, in 1933. So certainly not new, it's just being revisited today. And is it going to be embraced? That's the question. So the most recent thing that you do want to be aware of, I know that we're all talking about the small cells going up in neighborhoods, but this is something you want to keep your eye on. And these are called rooftop 5G antennas. There are companies right now in Arizona just started. They're going to solicit and ask for a home in a neighborhood to place a 5G antenna on top of their roof. Now this antenna would be able to be accessed by neighbors, so it would expose other homes. The company that I think is soliciting in Tucson, just starting, would be transmitting at 60 gigahertz, which is a very special frequency, as I'll show in a moment. But your home becomes a contractual arrangement to actually transmit microwaves to other people. The FCC right now has said, hey, this is okay. We're going to stand off. you can do what you want. Now, there's lawsuits to prevent this, but for now, the FCC gives special permission for these rooftop antennas. And the telecom carriers are saying, hey, this is a great way to get 5G into the neighborhood because we're getting so much pushback, not just in Tucson, not just around the United States, but around the world. There's been tremendous pushback on the rollout of these small cells. In fact, Tucson is late in the game. You got countries like Italy, France, and Belgium who pushed back 2 or 3 years ago, Switzerland as well. So Tucson is just getting up to speed. And yes, there are wireless diapers that will be connected to the Internet of Things. They will tell you when your diaper needs to be changed. These are Lumi smart diapers by Pampers. You can buy these. I don't know if I'd want a microwave transmitter on my baby, but these products exist. So hopefully if we become educated, we can make wise decisions. And this is really a question about privacy, which we'll also look at shortly.
Yeah, and just to jump in for a second, Russ, a couple of folks have commented in the chat that there's some extraneous noises coming in. So just a word to everybody, if you've got a question, please unmute, but otherwise let's all mute ourselves so there won't be any distraction. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, great. And again, jump in if you need clarity on something, but we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So now I've talked about what the promises are, what 4G, 5G is. Now it's a little more familiar. You can spot what these antennas look like and how it may benefit you and me, maybe the companies, maybe the government, who knows? You understand what the technology is capable of doing. So let's get into some of the problems that are well documented with densely placed 4G, 5G infrastructure. I'm going to talk quite a bit about the public safety, and yes, part of that is health, privacy, just a little bit, and just one slide on property value, just so it's clear what happens to your property when these come in your neighborhood. So even though I mentioned a lot of promises for 5G, I think it's fair to look at 5G smart cities that already exist. The first ones were really probably in China. So, and by the way, Google helped write the software to connect everything in certain cities in China. So I think it's important to know how things take place.
Just pay your premiums for lifelong.
And Russ, what you can do, you're the one person who can mute other participants.
Okay, yeah, let me
So if you can go to participants and just mute those who are
just
still
find
on.
where my
Your rate can never go up. It's locked in for life. Don't put it on.
sharing
First easy.
participants. Yeah, let's see, I'm gonna mute everybody except Stuart and myself. Not sure.
And you got muted this time. Yeah. No, I can't hear you yet.
I'm back.
Very good. Yeah, there's one more square that needs muting.
Yeah, Rob CR, I can't seem to mute, but it's okay. It's quiet, I think, now. So let's. Okay, so I wanted to give you a glimpse of what happens when everything is connected, you, me, and everybody else in China. Now, this is CCP. Google helped write their software to connect everything, but I want to give you a little taste of what a smart city in China looks like.
Constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name. Now, the Chinese are also ranked.
Your screen is not shared.
Teachers at this primary school in China know exactly when someone isn't paying attention.
Plus, we can't see the screen now.
Okay, I thought I shared, but let me go back.
Did, but somehow. There we go.
Do it again. Here we go.
Constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name. Now, the Chinese are also ranked.
红色是表示你的专注力显示的很高，
Teachers at this primary school in China
蓝色是走时了，
know exactly when someone isn't paying attention.
白色就是你可能跟网络还没有连接好。
These headbands measure each student's level of concentration. The information is then directly sent to the teacher's computer and to parents.
他可以看到每个人的评分。
就是自己的脑子搞清楚，稳定，静的。
This fifth grader, whom we caught dozing off in class, told us his parents punish him for low attention scores. China has big plans to become a global leader in artificial intelligence. It has enabled a cashless economy where people make purchases with their faces. A giant network of surveillance cameras with facial recognition helps police monitor citizens. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations. There are even surveillance cameras that monitor how often students check their phones or yawn during classes. Experts and citizens alike are sounding alarms about various aspects of the country's huge push into artificial intelligence. These classrooms are laboratories for future generations.
Okay, so that's a little glimpse. So, there's some good aspects and maybe some not so good aspects, but what really bothers me is if the people here are not directly engaged in how 5G is brought out to the community, there isn't any reason that these kinds of things may not take place here in terms of monitoring and punishing. And let's get into a little bit of the social engineering with my next short little video here.
How you is followed. What she buys, how she behaves is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is. It's called the social credit system, and in one version now being tested, a person's reputation is scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And how you, with a good score of 752, is okay with it. In fact, most people are.
It's a mechanism like pushes you to become a better citizen.
It's big data meets big brother, expanding how the government monitors, understands, and ultimately controls its 1.4 billion citizens.
这个是针对
Thanks to advances in artificial intelligence and facial recognition, and a web of more than 200 million surveillance cameras.
Are people bothered by privacy concerns?
We think the lot of camera will keep the safety is really good. We can accept it.
Companies are experimenting with the algorithms to help the government create the new national social credit system. The government also has pilot projects. In one, citizens are required to do hours of unpaid work to get benefits, and scores are docked for things like littering, a messy yard, gossip, even jaywalking. Video of offenders is shown on the local news. And information collectors like Zhou Aini are paid to report on their neighbors, her quota, 10 entries a month. Like the man who carried a drunk person home. A good deed, she says. Good social credit gets rewarded with perks like cheap loans and travel deals. But a bad score means public shame and worse. Huang Huijun lost a court case and didn't pay. Now he's on a government blacklist. I can't buy airplane or train tickets, he says, and the list goes on. Being discredited makes it hard to get a job or put kids in top schools. The social credit system will go nationwide next year, and few here are willing to criticize it, something that may pose a risk itself for a bad score and the life that comes with it. Janice.
Okay, so that's real, that's happened, and that's how things are in China in several cities. So it's important to understand how this technology could be used. And I do want to emphasize, they mentioned companies working closely with government to roll this out, but where are the people? In China, I can understand, but what about here in the United States? Are we directly engaged with our elected representatives and local government and how this technology is going to be used? Because the way the small cells are being shoved in our neighborhoods, sometimes over in the dark of the night, would make everyone question what is going on. And I think it's very important that we at least get control and have some say in what's happening, not just in the placement, but how this technology may be used. And we need more open discussion in public debating with leaders in the community as well as residents. So that's kind of more my opinion. That's not a peer review. That's just my opinion there. Okay, so let's go back to the health. I know a lot of you are into that, and that's next on drop. Before I get into health, one slide on property values, just so you understand where this comes from. In Houston, you even get these ugly things on the lawn. Luckily, we haven't had these, but when it comes to property value, here are the links. You'll have a copy of these slides. Anything that's underlined, generally, you can click on it and it'll take you to the reference. In California and other states, you actually have to disclose cell towers as a noise source, a nuisance. And the Housing and Urban Development refers to cell towers as a hazard and nuisance on their website, okay? So your city really has a duty to protect life and property. They're not doing that now. Now, we can talk about the state and federal government as well, but I wanna really focus on local, okay? I'm gonna skip this to save time, but the idea is that microwaves are invisible. They can be perceived, as I'll show in a second, but you have these portable meters. Some of you have, I know Lisa has, I don't know if you can see me here, that will take the exposure in your house and make audible noise. And you can actually hear it. This video link will actually play what that sounds like with some more sophisticated equipment. So that is 24/7. When you get a tower outside your bedroom, those things are generally going to be on 24/7, pulsing noise that you probably won't hear, although it is possible to hear, but it does affect your cells and it does affect your body, and it will be involuntary. You really can't get away from it. Okay, so when we talk about 4G, I mentioned microwave radiation. That's a very special band between 0.3 and 300 gigahertz on the spectrum. We are far away from X-rays and gamma rays. Some of you know that we call ionizing radiation. We know that's dangerous. If you get too much exposure, we all understand that. But what we don't realize that even by the time that X-rays understood were dangerous, we also understood that microwaves are dangerous to living systems, but in a very different way. And unfortunately, most people don't learn this at the university unless you're engaged in research or you've done your own research of the literature. It's not something typically taught. You're taught that it's generally safe, but I'll show you why it's not. The key things that microwaves will do is that it can change the structure and size of molecules. It doesn't work necessarily at the atomic scale, it works at the molecular scale. So structure and size of molecules, that is problematic because DNA is a type of molecule, okay? Water molecules, what's special also about microwaves is that water molecules and biological tissue strongly absorb microwave radiation, okay? So it becomes reactive. Now that could be heat, but it could be other things. A lot of people think, oh, microwaves, it's kind of like sunlight, you know, what's the big deal? I've heard this even from professors at the university. The facts are, before 1900, we didn't have microwave exposure on the planet. This is from Cross Currents, Robert Becker, MD, 1990. In fact, the only real source of microwaves was from lightning strikes. The atmosphere really blocks microwaves. So it wasn't until man-made EMF, which includes radio and microwaves, did we even have this on the surface of the planet when the first radar towers went up in the early 1900s. And there's nothing new here about microwaves. As I mentioned, it's one of the most studied things. In the 60s, these great public debates by Alan Frey and Hermann Schwann, and they both published their own papers describing well beyond heating effects of low-level microwave radiation, but they like to debate. They got along okay. They had different points of view, but you can go back, the microwave debate in 1984, that was published, talking about the debates in the 60s and 70s. These are two of the many great scientists after World War II that looked at pulse modulated microwave radiation. So microwave radiation affects living systems, first of all, at all scales, the molecular, the cellular, and the organ and the organism, organ and organism. There are well over 20,000 peer-reviewed and government studies, so it's not like you can just go home for the weekend and sort things out. I will give you some key highlights to take home and give you the gist of what's in there, what's in those peer-reviewed papers. We all probably understand that the higher power is generally more dangerous. Of course, if it's heating you significantly, everyone would acknowledge that. But in general, there is a relationship between the intensity of the microwaves and the potential hazard it could do to a living system. But there are two other things that I want you to remember. One is pulsation is more dangerous than continuous wave. It appears to affect the communication systems of your cells in your body. Many papers demonstrate that. And I will provide a list at the end of this so you all can look at the literature related to that. And maybe even more importantly, not even acknowledged by the FCC or even the FDA for that matter, is that effects are cumulative. FCC only says, hey, 30 minutes of exposure and it's below this level, we don't see a problem with it. If it's for 5 years or 20 years, we don't see a problem with it either. The point is they don't even recognize dose dependency despite the literature that says quite the contrary. Okay. Now, these are some of my favorite studies. A lot of these are your favorite agencies in government who have looked closely at this over the last many decades. And I'll just read off the agencies. You will get a copy of this. You can click on it and it'll take you right to the document. The agencies I've listed here are Army, Navy, Air Force, NASA, CIA, EPA, one of my favorites from 1984. After that, they lost all their expertise in microwave, but that study was, they had the top people doing that. The DoD, Ford Foundation, the WHO, NIH, some couple of very recent ones. The largest studies ever performed have come out the last couple of years, which I'll highlight in a second. And the largest study in Italy, the Ramazzini Institute, looking at rodents, animals, toxicology letters, EBM, IEEE, NIH. Okay, so that's 21 of my favorites. That'll get you started. Now I'm going to highlight and zoom in a little bit on these. I do want to point out, I know this is a sustainability group and there are quite a few people interested in the environment, but what happens to the human body absolutely can affect plants and animals. And there are many studies that have looked at the effects of wireless microwave radiation. And those are relatively low levels, many within what the FCC would consider acceptable standards that they use. There's a link there to 123 peer-reviewed publications, but the effects on bees, birds, wildlife. UNESCO did a 15-year study of the effect of transmitters and published a report in 2016. I highly recommend looking at what kind of effects they saw. But let's go back to what those effects are beyond heating. Well, here are three. Microwaves, pulse microwaves in particular, make the brain leaky. They open the blood-brain barrier, which allows things to get in. Many studies demonstrate that. Did you know that pulsed microwaves can actually be heard? That means audible noise. Well, that's actually something I do in my lab. It's called thermoacoustic imaging. We generate sound from pulse microwaves and we detect the sound. In this case, it's ultrasound. And we make images, three-dimensional images based on the sound. Well, in 1961, and there's even a book on this, an entire book, on the microwave auditory effect, pulse modulated microwave radiation, well below levels that the FCC considers standard for industry to follow, can be perceived under the right conditions. And people have suggested that possibly tinnitus could be linked to this sorts of effect. And there are papers that relate directly to that. We also know that microwaves since 1927 can make particles sticky electrically, so they can make them stick together. And when it's applied to the blood, like in that picture, we call that Rouleau syndrome. The effect is known as the Pearl effect. So what does that mean? Well, from the literature, we know that microwaves, pulse microwaves, can change the structure and size of molecules like DNA, which would directly link to clinical disease. It can produce audible noise and inaudible noise. It can disrupt biocommunication. It can create a stress response. It can release hormones like insulin and cortisol, directly measured in the blood. It can suppress the immune system. It's an immune suppressor. Recent review article, Professor Markovitz at Cal Berkeley did a nice review just recently on that topic. And it can alter normal brain signaling in extremely low levels. It can affect EEG. Okay, I'm going to provide a document. Here are 9 specific effects other than heat, well documented. And what I'm providing aren't just primary literature. I'm providing at least 15 to 30 review papers on each of these that will list their own primary literature peer-reviewed studies. So you'll be able to have more than enough to go to your neighbor and say, who says, oh, I don't believe, I think it's pretty, say, well, here, look at some of these. That's all, that'll be as that simple as that. And then they can go and look at something, all right? So that's how much of the, when you got 25,000 to work from, you got quite a database to think about when you talk with other people. And you don't need me there. The facts, the peer-reviewed literature speaks for itself, and the conclusions of those studies. I did want to make one special note on 60 gigahertz. That's been proposed on these OTARD, which is over-the-air receivers that that companies are proposing to put on people's homes. They one of them operates at 60 gigahertz, which happens to be a special frequency, well studied, because oxygen molecule absorbs very strongly at 60 gigahertz, you can see down there, as well as the skin. So there has been some discussion whether that could affect your blood and your hemoglobin and its ability to hold on to oxygen and delivering oxygen and transporting it to your tissue. So I'm just kind of describing the mechanism there as another thing to think about specifically with 60 gigahertz. I'm going to try to just scoot along here because I think you guys are getting the idea, but this is there's been many studies looking at blood, human blood. This is the Weston Price website, but they're peer-reviewed studies as well that have looked at this using phase contrast microscope. But basically, normal cells look round, like in the upper left. And when they've had people either hold or use cell phones, they've seen changes in the blood. There have been studies that have looked at teachers with Wi-Fi in schools, seen similar effects, sometimes in a very quickly. And then they see recovery when the person goes home in an acquired environment and their cells go back. So these are things that I think needs to be more widely known and even looked at the university. I don't know anybody here at the university doing these experiments or even maybe necessarily aware of some of this. Here's just one paper from the Navy that cites 2,300 papers. This is from 1972. They talk about microwave effects on the body, brain, eyes, heart, respiratory, muscular, reproductive. Again, you'll have a link to that if you want to look at it. The WHO conference, this was a very important conference in 1973 in Warsaw, Poland. It brought the top scientists in the world, 60 scientists, to Warsaw to share their data and results from animal to human to occupational exposure. I'm just going to read the conclusions, not of a particular study, of the entire conference, okay? One of the conclusions, in addition to their heating effect in tissues, microwaves interact with the electric dipole moment of biologic molecules. These interactions may be observed and interpreted in terms of the shape and size of the macromolecules. Such parameters may be correlated with the incidence and treatment of certain diseases. In this way, it would be possible to find a direct link between a clinical condition and a structural abnormality at a molecular level, analogous to sickle cell anemia, where the red blood cell is misshapen, leading to a typical type of disease, okay? So that is also downloadable from the internet, that in 350 pages. It's amazing what was known by 1973. And I think the studies since then have very much confirmed what we knew then, although we do have quite a bit more industry-funded studies since the early 1970s. Many of those also very important as well, showing interesting positive results. Ford Foundation, just looking at the central nervous system, it's about 100 pages, a review of all the different things that pulse microwaves can do. I'm going to kind of go a little bit more quickly, but there are epidemiologic studies, many of them, many countries, China, United States, Middle East, Brazil in this case, looking at the distance of cell phone towers. I will come back to this shortly. I do want to mention the largest study ever conducted and where this came about. And again, this is going to be 4G because it's cell phone radiation, but it's all part of the same band that would be used as part of 5G. But basically in the 90s, the FCC says, you know, we're hearing all these complaints from the public that this type of 4G stuff, 3G and 4G is dangerous. They went to the FDA and said, you know, we're not qualified to do that. We're a bunch of engineers. We can't look at this. Will you set up a study and end this once and for all and convince the public that this is perfectly safe for people to use their cell phones or live near a cell tower? The FDA said, oh, we're not qualified to do this. We need to go to the NTP, National Toxicology Program, who are the pioneers, the gold standard for looking at environmental effects. So they designed a $30 million study, which took over 10 years in mice and rats, multi-center, independently run controlled studies, only to conclude that this type of radiation, and this is their words, clearly causes 9 different types of cancer in brain, especially the brain, heart, and prostate. So that's in mice and rats. That was also confirmed by the largest study in Italy, which was a separate study, the Ramsini Institute. They also saw cardiac myopathy, enlargement of the heart. And last year they reported genotoxicity, which is DNA damage, but others have already demonstrated that. So that was just confirming. The largest European study, the Reflex study in 2004, compared a control with cell phone exposure. This was 24 hours of exposure of 1.8 gigahertz mobile phone. They saw DNA damage on par with gamma radiation, 1600 chest x-rays. Now, this isn't necessarily equivalent to what you're doing at home. This is the same type of exposure, but to conclude that this is perfectly safe doesn't make sense. You could say there could be differences in these studies and what you and I may be doing with them at home, but this should be raising alarm. I think everyone should be aware of these studies. They should be discussed in public, and we should have people on the other side with industry coming to the table with their studies to debate this, to get everything out in the open. Okay, you know, this is Airforce, same sort of thing, 1988. Okay, so I'm not going to keep, I'm going to just, if there's something new here, the immune suppressor, this was the review article I talked about. I think during this pandemic that we've had, to know that our devices, cell phone towers, potentially could suppress our immune system and make us vulnerable to infection or disease. That's something that would have been very helpful to know. And there's many peer-reviewed papers that suggest such that. So I did make statements about that for those that asked me. In fact, I made statements of February and March of last year, right before this started, about the problems with the small cells at the faculty senate at the U of A. I'm a faculty senator, so the president and my fellow senators were there. And I brought in Libby Kelly, and a physician, very familiar, and we all made statements last March of 2020. So this is all on the record. We knew what was happening and what was coming. Blood-brain barrier, again, the mechanisms, we can get into this, but this is just demonstrating how your brain can become leaky. I want to try to wrap up here quickly because I didn't get to the solution. So I'm going to kind of go much more quickly to end this, and next, I'm going to go till 7 and then we'll have plenty of time. Symptoms versus cell tower proximity. I'm sure you're all wondering about this. Now, this is a 4G large tower, and it's looking at the effects of the distance from the tower to 16 different effects or symptoms that people felt, okay? There's been several different studies like this. This was published a few years ago, but you can see a very clear correlation between the closer you are to the tower, to more likely you're going to feel symptoms like fatigue, sleep disturbance, nausea, dizziness, et cetera, et cetera. Now, those are also documented in other studies to show that this type of energy can do that to people. This is just simply an epidemiologic study, and I'm linking to many more epidemiologic studies down below. And here's a list of a few of those. If you want to look at what they found, again, effects of mobile stations. Now, most of the epidemiologic studies, we call those associative, because you can't just control for one variable, so there's many different variables. But some of the other studies I mentioned are directly looking at causation because they're controlling for one variable. But the epidemiologic tend to be more associative, so it's important to make that distinction. So why would a small cell, or how would a small cell be different than a large tower that we all are familiar with? It turns out these small cells, because of their close proximity, can actually produce much more power than a large 4G tower that in this case is a half a mile away, 200 feet high, and it's now calibrated to be what would be equivalent to 5 bars on a cell phone. So that's the 0.002, half a mile away. Now, if you compare that, and these are actual measurements in the Bay Area, so these aren't hypothetical, they're actually measured. 35 feet from this bedroom window, I'm sorry, 60 feet from the window, 35 feet tall, you get 25 million times more power than the equivalent 4G tower half a mile away. Okay, so keep that in mind. I won't go into detail, but the people that have had these towers, there's been lots of cases where people felt sick, and in some cases, entire families. I'm talking the Bay Area that I'm familiar with some of these. These are measurements I've taken. So I'm not going to go too much into this, but I'm going to highlight the FCC guideline for industry to follow is this bottom line. That's the standard they need to meet. I'm going to point out that China and Russia have 100 times more stringent thresholds for their community than the United States and England and Canada. They have those are the three countries that have the most lenient thresholds on their threshold, but of their guideline. But as you go up in exposures from the bottom, or as you go down, I'm sorry, towards the top, you get to see all these other things that have been published to demonstrate these biological effects. That's why you've got many lawsuits trying to get the FCC to lower that threshold. The lower you can get it, the more likely you're going to protect people. And the small cells are able to transmit certainly up to the FCC limit legally. In some cases, you're going beyond that. I do want to mention that children are most vulnerable because their skulls are thin. And so the microwaves can penetrate further into their head. So they have less protective. That's also true for their bone and their bone marrow. Okay, so Wi-Fi in schools becomes relevant. That's why France banned Wi-Fi from their school. And 10 years ago, up to middle school, they don't allow Wi-Fi in many other countries. And there are states around in the United States looking to do the same thing. Some have already, some schools at least. But look at countries banning and restricting Wi-Fi in school. France, Israel, Belgium, Cyprus, Rwanda, Australia, even China earlier this year announced that they're banning smartphones from their classrooms for health and also other reasons. But it's not even barely talked about here. But here are other places that are working on removing industrial strength Wi-Fi from schools. It's not just your home Wi-Fi, it's actually industrial length, all the same types of gigahertz frequencies. Okay, I did want to spend 2 minutes here on the solution. Several Tucson residents got together about 3 months ago, recognizing that the Tucson ordinance is very weak, very difficult to engage with anyone on the council and the mayor. We wanted to say, do the work for them. We even helped people that really love Tucson outside here put together something based on the local state and federal law that would dramatically help protect people. It's not perfect, but it goes a long way to start blocking the citing of these permits, given the existing laws that we're not taking advantage of. So I want to encourage everyone to go there. I'm not going to go into detail, but they'll have the slides. These are some of the things. I know that some of you have talked with Steve Kay, and he's talked about co-location. We go far beyond anything that he's doing. We have not been able to meet with him. We've offered many times, even 15 minutes, he's not met with us, and none of the other city council members. We had 100 signatures requesting they meet with us for 15 minutes to talk about the ordinance, including the mayor. We've gotten no feedback from them willing to meet with us. So it's really up to the community to look at this and get this up for discussion. We've got a lot of good things here. We cite the law. All the laws of why we can do a lot of the things that we're saying. The state, how many times have you heard from your local representative that their hands are tied? Right here in the state bill, it says that the permits for these towers can be denied for reasons of public safety. It's right there. There's 2 places right there. This is just an example. They're not doing this. They're not even acknowledging it. They're saying they can't do anything. There are many things in the state bill that allow the city to do something, and whether that's advice from their city attorney, which is very likely the case, they're afraid to even talk to the community about this, to start to fix the problem. And all they want to talk about is either painting it a different color or negotiating with the carriers. Unfortunately, they need to be talking to the people that voted for them and not the carriers directly, in my opinion. But anyway, this will all be available. You can go through this and some of the argument, or we can also come back and go into this solution and how we want to do it. Final slide. We talk about 5G as if it's the greatest technology in terms it will deliver the wise city that we're looking for. I want to remind people that there are other technologies that may even do a better job at doing that. And there are cities that have already embraced these technologies. This one here is fiber to the premises. The city owns the underground fiber optic network that is required for 5G. So what's the difference here? We come to the curb near the home, we rip up the curb and we put a small cell there and connect the small cell to the fiber optic network because it needs the fiber optic. What fiber to the premises says is we don't want to break the curb. We want to bring the fiber all the way to the home and the businesses and let them decide what they want to do inside their home and business. If they want Wi-Fi, great. If they want Ethernet, the fact of the matter is fiber to the premises is far faster than 5G. You can see 100 terabytes versus it's at least 10, if not more faster. And you've got cities like Chattanooga, Tennessee, of several years ago decided we want fiber to the premises. We don't want 5G. And they have the fastest internet in the country. And they just recently reported it was been a huge boom on their economy of $2.7 billion. Okay. There are other cities that are trying to match and follow in the path of Chattanooga and already doing that by simply taking that fiber, city-owned fiber, and actually even generating revenue for the city if you do it wisely. And we see this as something we really want to encourage the city to be looking at. We want the residents here and to be encouraging and promoting this because it is safe. It doesn't require the microwaves, it's faster, and it's much more secure. You can't just intercept things through the Wi-Fi. That doesn't mean you have to completely eliminate voice Wi-Fi. It would dramatically reduce the need for these small cells, and I think it would have a big impact. So I'm going to stop there so we can have questions. Of course, there are tips to protect people, to limit exposure if that comes up as a question, but I'd rather now just throw this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen when I can figure it out. Let's see, over here maybe. Here we go. All right.
Thank you, Russ.
Overtime.
Please type your questions into the chat, or if you would like to, if you have the ability to unmute, that would be all right as well. And Russ, we've got a question that was asked a little earlier. It said, suggesting that vaccine passports are similar in when you were looking at things from China. Are vaccine passports of a kind with the kind of work they're doing in China that you showed us, monitoring, controlling everyone using 5G?
Well, of course, the vision for 5G is everything is connected through this wireless microwave technology. So, you know, whether that's something inside your body or outside your body or your passport, everything is talking to each other. And that's used often for the advantage of the companies to know how to market to you. In terms of the vaccine passport, it's a way to, I suppose, control, to know without you even presenting it, right? You saw in China, they don't need a passport. They don't need a phone. They walk in, it's facial recognition in McDonald's. They know what the person, who the person is, what they want to order, and it comes directly out of their bank account. It's deposited. It's very convenient. So you don't need anything there, right? You don't need the vaccine passport in China. Certain cities in China, it's not everywhere.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that the vaccine passport is a very limited scope and very limited objective compared to what is being done with 5G.
Yeah, and I have a feeling you wouldn't need it if 5G was rolled out the way that they want to in the future. It may be a stepping stone to connecting everything, and it's needed now because, to be honest with you, 5G in the United States is very far away. Their infrastructure is not there. You know, they still need years. Most of the towers are transmitting 4G. So to be honest with you, I think they're far behind of where they'd like to be with connecting everything.
Now, Ruth asks, how do we talk about public safety without it sounding like health? What's the difference?
Yeah, the first thing is you just use those terms because it's in the law. But public safety is a little bit different. of course, health is part of public safety, but it's also neighborhood nuisance laws. So these towers are microwave factories. They're polluting your neighborhood. They're producing audible noise, as I told you, and also inaudible noise. That's protected by public safety. Your environment, the bees, the trees, the plants, that also has an effect on public safety. So there are several other things where that public safety is a subset of. The key is that you use that terminology, and if the city writes their ordinance properly and say, hey, this is violating public safety, they don't have to say health, it just violates public safety and mark. Now, clearly, no matter what the city does, they're going to get sued. The carriers aren't going to let them create a better ordinance that's for the people, but the people are going to sue because there's going to be injury and damage and other problems from the towers going up. So the city's going to get sued either way. Now they're being very careful because they even say that, oh, we don't want to get sued, right? But at some point a decision needs to be made. But we think if you can make a sound legal argument, that you got to let the judge decide what the merits are of that argument.
In fact, I've heard the word safety as much as health during the pandemic. People say stay safe. Everything you're doing, masking, washing hands, that's for safety. So do you think that that could actually carry, that we could convince our legislators to take that kind of language?
Yeah, well, absolutely safety, but you also throw in a privacy, because the state legislatures, from what I've heard from Pamela Powers Hanley, they're up in arms about the whole 5G and privacy, and also the property values. So you throw them all in, and I didn't mention this, but I don't believe the city has liability insurance for damage. These towers are being put on public rights of way. And the reason they don't have liability insurance is because there is no insurance company that will insure electromagnetic radiation, microwave especially, damage or injury. Lloyd's of London, for example, has an exclusion, and they will not pay out any damages from that. So there is a liability problem. There's the possibility of the city going bankrupt from lawsuits, and the other cities in California are aware of this. And one of the reasons they vetoed, or Jerry Brown at the time vetoed their state bill, was the worry that their cities could go bankrupt. So you want to keep all of them together, but absolutely, you say public safety, you back it up and you cite the law. So Rima, do you want to say something?
I do. I'm Rimi Lebo, MD. I'm a physician. One of my specialty trainings is environmental medicine. So I have been looking at this for quite a while. A few days ago, a notice appeared on my door and the doors of my neighbors in the central Tucson region near 5th and Alvernon, Calle Fernando and Del Norte, that a, quote, small cell tower would be built. Turns out it was 20 feet from my home. This is not a good thing. So my neighbors and I got active. We occupied the site, but I also did several other things. It is true that we are not allowed to say health and safety, or health effects, but we are allowed to say disability, Americans with Disability Act. And Arizona has a mirroring act, as does every state in the union. So I had an attorney who happens to be the co-trustee of the foundation, of which I'm the medical director, Natural Solutions Foundation. I had him create a cease and desist letter, and I had a physician here in town, a naturopath, certify that I have sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. So do you, so does every living biological system. And I would like to make an offer as a physician. If anyone would like to contact me, I will do a free consultation, and I'll bet we'll find that you get a letter saying that you too are sensitive to electromagnetic radiation, which then gives you a disability that gives you the right to be protected. Now, you can't tell them not to build the tower 20 feet from your house, but you can say it is your responsibility to completely shield me from anything that does not accommodate my disability. You are required to accommodate my disability. There is no, Dr. Witte, perhaps you can amplify what I believe. If it's not true, tell me. And that is that there is no shielding that can be applied that would shield everybody who is sensitive, which is everybody. So that was strategy one. And I think we ought to exploit that like crazy. I'll put my phone number in the chat, and anybody who wants to contact me and set up an appointment at no charge can have that consultation. That's number one. Number two, I have a tree. It is, I am told, a mesquite tree. It's a big tree. It sheds. It's beautiful. And I was told, I came out the evening before they were supposed to start construction, and there was a cherry picker on a big bed thing. And I said, "What are you doing?" to the guy in the hard hat. And he said, "We're measuring your tree." I said, "That's nice. Why?" He said, "If the tree is more than 32 feet tall, we can't erect the tower." I said, "Oh, that's pretty cool. How tall is the tree?" 31 feet. I said, "Son of a gun." So the second cease and desist letter that was written was, "I don't trust your measurement. I want an independent surveyor measuring my tree to determine whether or not it is in fact 32 feet tall. I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees." No, I did not put that in. But the point is, there are environmental and situational particulars that can be used to slow these bastards down. And then the third thing, yeah, this is my favorite. The third thing is that I happen to be one of the judges of an international group of judges of a tribunal of conscience called the Natural and Common Law Tribunal of Public Health and Justice, Public Safety and Justice. And we have determined that among the genocidal technologies being deployed globally, yes, slow those bastards down. No, slowing the bastards down is not enough. Stop the bastards in their damn tracks and make sure that they can't move forward here or anywhere else. But anyway, there is, and I will give you the website where you can download it. There is a cease and desist letter for the deployment, cease and desist document of 52 pages against the deployment of 5G technology for reasons that Dr. Witte has spoken about, and other reasons based on a huge amount of research, testimony, etc. And that is freely available for anyone to download. We served all the worthies in the companies and the subcontractors and the city council with this cease and desist, which accuses them of war crimes. According to the Statute of Rome, that's technical, but the fact is that it counts. And son of a gun, they stopped. And they said, "Oh, well, you know what? We're just going to suspend construction until September. Their permit runs out on August 30th. So we'll suspend it until September so that we can have public dialogue." Now, meanwhile, while that's happening with this one tower, and by the way, I would appreciate knowing if it's true that it's unusual for a permit to have just one tower. This permit has one tower, the one that's 20 feet from my house. That's interesting. I'm a full-time political activist, and I've been on this issue for a number of years, along with the vaccine issue. But yes, anyhow, the point is that we will be structuring not only meetings and pressure on the city council, which is very important, and the county officials, but also the state and the federal ones. And I'd be more than happy to share all that with you and ask you to join in that while I join in what you're doing along with my guys, because we don't have to, it's not just a matter of stopping this in our backyard. Yeah, I don't want a tower next to my house, but I don't want a tower next to your house, and I don't want a tower next to somebody's house in Phoenix either. We have to stop this nationally and internationally, and it is doable. So I'm happy to share my links and contact, and I am eager to participate with anything that's going on here. And I was just about to reach out to you, Dr. Witte. We had met before because you asked me to lecture for your group. And I would like to talk to you about some technical kinds of things if we can do that. So
Okay.
that's all I have
Okay.
to say.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Beth?
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, I'm so glad for everything that you said, Remo, and I would
Thank
love
you.
to be part of your group. So whatever the contact information is, count me in. But my
Okay, here.
question is, what about EMF shield for our houses, for our cars, or for ourselves? I already have an EMF shield I've been wearing for years that's a necklace. And I don't have any proof that it works, but I believe that it's helping me.
Yeah, so when people ask that, my answer might be a little different than other people's. I do believe that some of these devices work on the quantum level. Okay, and I've lectured on not specifically the devices, but the importance of electricity and magnetism at quantum level. What I basically, and I'm not a physician, so I can't really give you health advice from that standpoint, but what I do recommend is for people to try some of these devices and see if you get any benefit in a couple weeks or a month. They'll often let you return it. If you don't feel benefit, just return it. If it actually, you feel like it benefits, it might be a placebo or it might be real, but do you really care, right? If I'm a scientist in the lab, I care, but if you're getting a benefit, you shouldn't care. So that's what I do. I do think there is definitely a possibility that these things actually do something beyond our understanding at the traditional academic level of how the body works. And I could definitely try to explain what might be happening in these. But the other thing is there are so many different companies that offer these that you don't really know, they could be legitimate, they may not be. So there's really no way to know other than to try, maybe try a couple, try 3. I do know people that have benefited. I've tried some of these. I feel like I have had a benefit from these myself, but that's all I can say. I can't hand you a peer-reviewed paper and say, here's what you need to know on that.
Okay, and one more question I have, please. I just found out that I live in a community of 200 homes, and I just found out that they're going to be putting smart meters on all of our houses. And I accidentally got this information. So I called my doctor, and he wrote me a letter saying my symptoms, if there's a smart meter in my house, and how I react to the microwaves. And I'm going to submit that to TEP when that happens, because I will do anything to keep a smart meter off my house. So I just want people to know that my doctor wrote the letter, and TEP said that it can't do any harm to submit it, and it might make a difference. And and then also you do have an opt-out option.
Right.
You can pay $40-some to be opted out, and then you pay a monthly fee to not have the meter on your house. So I'm hoping they'll waive the monthly fee, because it's a detriment to my health. But either way, I'm not putting it on my house.
Yeah, I have heard people fight that charge of a fee, and they give up on this. There's ways to fight that. I don't think they're allowed to do that. It's some kind of discrimination to make you opt out and then pay more. So yeah, definitely opting out is your best option there. The smart meters, they send really strong pulses, I think every 20 seconds. And there's some videos online where people have measured the heart. And you can directly see arrhythmias in people's hearts synchronized with the pulsing of the smart meters. There's some really good videos where they have a cardiologist there and synchronize everything. So smart meters, and a lot of people get most of their exposure in their home still, if you're not familiar with this. So those decked phones, those cordless phones, they're like cell towers in your home. You want to replace that with a wired phone if you can. The European versions, they actually don't transmit unless you're using it, but in the United States, they go 24/7, those deck phones. So that would be one of the first things I would get rid of if you have that in your home. Of course, Wi-Fi, if you can, there's easy ways to directly connect to your router. But even if you do have to use Wi-Fi, just turn it off at night when you're sleeping. I think that's important. Those are just on some of my tips pages. I do that. And I know people that have benefited from doing that. Other questions?
Oh my God, are we going to be able to see this?
It might take a minute for us, Russ, to bring our thoughts up to the surface. You gave us a lot to think about.
I know I have a tendency to do that. It's like a compromise between too little and too much, but I try to get my money. I try to give you your money's worth at least.
Yes.
Which was
well,
nothing.
We definitely got that. Now, Robin just commented that she called Comcast and I'm not sure, asked them about wireless, and their employee immediately asked if she was sensitive to EMF, I think, or to EMRs. I think she's indicating by that the employees answering the phone at Comcast are aware now that there are people who are sensitive, and they are more alert. Is that what you're saying, Robin?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Thank you.
And a comment from Kevin and Naomi Green. They were wondering about what's going on outside city limits. Robin said, well, just get in touch with Russ or Lisa Smith or Robin. Do you want to give us a short version of what's happening outside City of Tucson?
So there's Pima County and then there's Tucson. Pima County does oversee a lot of the towers that are not within those 6 wards in Tucson, like the foothills area. And we are working with both the Pima County and the Tucson. There's been some of the staff that in the planning department at Pima County that has been very open to look for solutions. I'd say more so than the Tucson City Council, which is really, to me, very frustrating when we can't really have a conversation with them when we really think that they can do much better in the ordinance, and we can't even sit down and do anything. They don't respond. This is really frustrating for Tucson. But Pima County is, I think, I don't know what the boundaries are, but obviously it's anything that's not Tucson, I believe would be under Pima County. Maybe Robin knows more than that. In terms of exposures, I don't know. Just remember that this technology is designated to go everywhere worldwide at some point. And the point is that these small cells were planned to go up every 3 houses, about every 500 feet, to connect everything to the grid. So that's ultimately the plan. I don't know if Robin, you had anything else, or Lisa.
Just if anyone's interested in helping the efforts, please contact me. I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you. Great job, Russ. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Meg has made a suggestion that one of the things we might consider asking our candidates for the 3 wards who will be elected this summer and fall, to ask them what they understand about 5G and what their position is.
Excellent, very good idea. And I think we've talked to Val Romero, and he's very supportive of the effort and wants to help out. But I think everybody needs to kind of do the same thing. Robin, do you know any of the other candidates, their position? Because I know that you've met with some of them at least. Most
of them are pretty close to it, and some have even published that they were one of the candidates for Ward 6 said that. But Val Romero is very interested in engaging in solutions.
On behalf of our city council folks, they've been advised by city attorneys that the law is such and such. And Russ has pointed out certain ways that we can expand the frame of reference. So I think we need to recognize and honor that not everybody's getting enough sleep at night, and sometimes they look at a thing and they know what they know, but they can't quite get beyond that. So I think we need to be sympathetic, and if on any issue, if you really want to get across, I think a certain amount of sympathy as well as persistence could get you a long ways. Rima, do you have something? We've got a few minutes left.
I have 2 questions. The first is, I found it extremely peculiar that the permit for the tower next to my house had only one tower on it. You can't build much of a network with one tower. But you people have much more experience with permits here than I do. Is that unusual or is that common?
I can answer that. This is Lisa Smith. There's only one tower per permit in Tucson.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But they usually do try to put them in a network of some sort, and I haven't been able to figure out the networking that's going on for individual companies like AT&T and Verizon, but definitely just one tower per permit.
Okay, thank you. That's clarifying. The other question is, I was informed, I think as a matter of fact, Lisa, you were the one who shared the information when all the neighbors were gathered at my corner, that the fiber optics for 5G are strung directly across the street on the poles. I assume they were strung by Tucson at taxpayer expense. If that's so, why are we not leveraging and pushing to use the fiber optic to house method?
Well, that's exactly one of the things in the ordinance. The city can demand that they put a box that provides anybody access to that box if they want to pay for it or otherwise, to basically extend fiber to the home. So that's something that could be put into the ordinance to provide competition, where if you're going to put up a tower, you at least got to make a box with access to the fiber optics if people want to use that. This is what other cities are doing or looking at, but it has to be in the ordinance. Again, the city won't meet with anybody to even talk about. The last time they had a study session to talk about change the ordinance, it was closed to the public. And they said, and the end of it, they said, "Oh, we're going to work with the city staff and the carriers to fix a couple things." So Steve Kaisman, all he talks about is co-location. But in reality, they have to co-locate. That should have been enforced from the beginning. That's in the law. They have to co-locate. They can't just put up a new tower. They got to go find a nearby tower and use that. The whole thing's ridiculous. You're muted, Rena.
I figured you didn't want to hear the puppy barking. Do we have lawyers working with us to force meetings and enforce our legal strengths?
So that's a good point, Rima. So the group, Robin, and the several of us that have been working together for the last few months, that's something we always talk about. We can't find anybody. We don't have anybody. We don't even have a name. Yeah, that's been really frustrating. We can't force anything. And anything we do, we get outside experts to look at it for free, or we may pay them, but we write the letters ourselves. So we don't have anything like that.
I think I can help. No, I'm certainly not an attorney, but this group, the tribunal and my foundation, have some really crackerjack folks who are working with us pro bono, and I think maybe we can be of assistance.
Okay, that would be great. You know, by the way, the biggest request we have now is for them to open up their public meetings, because if they're using Teams, you can't show your face. The mayor has to call on you. This is not participation. It's violating open meeting laws. We've told them for months to at least make it a Zoom call if you're not going to do it in person, and they refuse to change it. So we don't have open public meetings right now. It's a joke if you actually go to the Tucson meeting.
But it's required by law to have open public meetings?
Yeah, it's open meeting law.
Good. Oh,
and
excellent.
And we're supposed to be able to attend, which means participate, which means show our face. Okay, we can't do any of that.
I love this. Yeah. You know, my contact information is there, and I am more than delighted to bring the resources that, you know, I've accumulated to this battle.
Russ, we're coming in on the last few minutes. I want to point out to everybody that you put into the chat box a response to one of our council members who's claimed there's nothing that we can do legally as cities to have an influence here. And so I'm sure that might be a really interesting read, and it's going to be not as long as some of those papers, but of all those wonderful references that you're going to, I guess you're going to give those, you'll give those to me, and then I'm to distribute those? Is that what you're planning?
Yeah, so I'll provide my slides, and most of the things underlined have clickable links so you can find them. I'm going to provide some of my favorite links, and then a separate thing that I made where I listed 9 different effects other than heat. Within each one of those, this is just a new thing I prepared today. Within each one of those, there are at least 15 and up to 34 review articles. They're reviews that include up to 100 peer-reviewed papers supporting why these are effects of micros. So these are great things you can just hand to people. You don't have to say anything. They say, well, I don't really know. Oh, that's ridiculous. There's no effect. It says, here, look at these. You don't have to say anything. I want to empower you guys so you don't need an expert, so-called expert like me, to get on and say, oh, no, there's a problem. No, you just hand the science to the person, say, go read these and then come back and let's talk. That's all you got to do. So that's what I'm going to provide, those 3 things, slides and a couple of documents for you guys. And if there's anything else you're looking for specifically, just let me know. I obviously have very good access at the university where I can find papers. I have people around the country who says, oh, can you find this paper for me? Because if they're not at the university, they don't have access to it. That's one of the great things that I think everybody should have access to these papers.
Russ, thank you. And I'm putting my email address into the chat now. I'm putting it to everyone, but if you understandably wish to keep your email private, just reply to me. And of course, we are very careful with people's email addresses. And then I'll be sure that you can get his materials. So here it comes into the chat. And the last question, Russ, as we've hit 7:31, we're just about to adjourn. I'll be leaving. Maybe Trace will stick around for a little while longer. If there were one paper in all those thousands, could you highlight for us, perhaps when you send me that note, what would be to you the one that?
You know what I'm going to recommend? I'm going to recommend it's actually a document. Okay, it was just completed by the state of New Hampshire. Okay, a 5G commission. They spent a year looking at health on 5G. They published a 390-page report, but it includes a 17-page majority report. That's an easy read. But since it was just done, it's 13. The legislatures elected 13 people, including a chair of engineering. They got physicians. They got 3 people from industry. I think it's a great document, which I didn't even mention, that would be something that would be very, to me, quite objective, because it has both sides. And that's what I will recommend for you.
Okay. Russ, we are so grateful. You've put so much thought, so much effort into this, and you've given us a lot to think about. And we may decide to have someone come and give us another perspective, just so we feel that we're being fair and balanced. But I know a lot of us have been very moved by your arguments and your evidence. So we are, again, very grateful.